In the Thick of It. Further reflections on the mess and the magic of collaborative partnerships. Nearly 2 years ago, full of excitement for various collaborative partnerships that were emerging, but also frustrated with the ubiquity and imprecision of the word collaboration, I wrote a paper entitled "The Voice That Calls the Hand to Write, Exploring the Adventure of Agency and Authorship Within Collaborative Partnerships." Through writing that paper, I found clarity. However, my feelings about collaboration became more complex, and each time I came to present the paper, I felt I needed to amend certain points or distance myself from some of my ideas. So, when in 2020 I found myself embroiled in several collaborative projects, I took a deep breath and decided it was time to write something new. I am truly in the thick of it. Of the collaborative partnerships that inspired me to write the first paper, some continue to bear fruit, whilst others have run their course, and meanwhile new ones have emerged, each confounding expectations. This strikes me as appropriate, because the process of building each collaborative practice is risky, and the results are unpredictable. I'm picking up here roughly where I left off in the final version, from December 2019, of my earlier paper. But if the first was a paper, this is an essay. Where the first focused on composer-performer collaboration and was grounded in academic literature, this is coloured by a much more eccentric bibliography and gives vent to a more subjective approach. Once again, though, case studies play a role because all this thinking and writing is fuelled by the need to understand the lived experience. This essay was started in August 2020 and is being completed in January 2021. I will largely avoid talking about the pandemic, but it is the undeniable backdrop. It is the reason that I have had the time to let my thoughts sprawl, at my reading meander, and the precarity of the future has, I suspect, contributed to a certain degree of navel-gazing and fuck-itness when considering what I want for my own practice and from future collaborations. I offer the earlier paper and this essay as a footnote to my creative practice and as a personal meditation on the inevitable mess and potential magic of collaboration. Part 1. Contaminated entanglements. Whilst I want to avoid covering old ground, it might be useful to recapitulate what we mean when we talk about collaboration between a composer and a performer. In my earlier paper, I proposed that collaboration was a shared practice that intentionally cultivates an intimate creative space, physical, intellectual, and emotional, and produces a distinctive body of work. I observed that common features of a healthy collaboration are a shared aesthetic mission, a non-hierarchical structure, mutual dependence, a dialogue-rich process, and a shared vulnerability, and that these features have to be built up over time. I concluded that there was a sliding scale of creative engagement upon which participation might represent the least enmeshed and collaboration the most, and I advocated for its judicious use as a term. It strikes me now that one crucial word is missing: transformation. Leaving aside the misguided fools who might pursue collaboration as a means of leveraging funding or gaining a status bump through association, the most common motivation for undertaking collaborative work is the desire to expand oneself, to transform and be transformed by the other. Furthermore, I would emphasize that collaboration is about process. For an endeavor to be truly collaborative, the partners must pay more attention to the way things are done than to what they are trying to make. This time I find myself wandering like a true flâneuse along some unexpected avenues of thought. What might seem tangential is nearly always connected to two questions. Firstly, with whom do I want to work and how? Second, in what ways could a new attitude towards collaboration rewild my new music community? I'm writing not for any particular audience this time, so I have no map and no fixed destination. I have simply followed my nose, but along the way my thinking has been happily contaminated by the voices of Hélène Cizou, Donna Haraway, Eduardo Korn, Bruno Latour, and Anna Lovenhaupt-Singh. It was Singh who got me excited about mess when she wrote that collaboration means working across difference, which leads to contamination. Where collaboration sounds sanitary, contamination is messy. It describes a two-way transformation, a risky infraction, and a breaking through of walls. Collaboration for me is about the possibility to travel in new directions, to be contaminated and disrupted by other minds and other disciplines, other ways of thinking and doing. Singh's image of contaminated entanglements reinforces my view that mess is the magic of so much good work, and that the process of building new ways of thinking and doing in one arena of our lives rarely stays sequestered there. It also provides a framework loose enough for me to revisit old ideas about agency and authorship, whilst bringing in new ideas about habits, stories, and compost that explore the potential for anthropological, ecological, and feminist thinking to contaminate and reinvigorate our collaborative models. The quest for agency. In my earlier paper, I commented that one of the main reasons for investing in collaborative projects was to be stretched, and observed that, in collaborative work with specific composers, I felt I had shifted from being an interpreter to being an agent in the creative process. Agency is associated with autonomy and with individual power, so how does this term come into play when discussing collaboration? Surely there's a conflict there. I would argue not. Part of the magic of a true and successful collaboration is that both, or all parties, can increase their sense of individual agency without lessening the agency of the other, or others. To borrow Donna Haraway's word, combined creative energies harnessed in sympoiesis, or making with, are always more than the sum of their individual parts. However, it's worth noting that a misaligned or unhealthy collaboration is very likely to result in at least one party's agency being diminished. This is a risky business. Disentangling the self from the collective in collaboration is tricky, but my hunch is that it is each individual's responsibility to tend to their own needs and desires, and to communicate those effectively within the common aims of the project. Co-labour and authorship. Discussing authorship in the context of collaborative work is so important. In her characteristic messing around with language, Donna Haraway talks about the co-labourer, which suddenly, belatedly, had me considering the etymology of the word collaborator. This is someone with whom, not for whom, I labour. There is an implicit lack of hierarchy here, even if the precise nature of the labour may not be identical. Of course, it's not essential that every project redefine the roles completely or result in official co-authorship, but building a shared creative practice surely necessitates the navigation of some grey areas. And it does seem that many artists want a more inclusive, flexible model. In their book, The Second Sound, Conversations on Gender and Music, Julia Eckhardt and Lynn de Greve observe that the whole line of testimonies shows a general wish for change in the paradigm, away from the author as a single genius, towards an approach of creation which includes art, the field, and personal life reality. To get practical for a moment, let us remember that the options for assigning and crediting authorship are many. At the personal level, it may be that a private acknowledgement of the co-labour, of the messy entanglements of ideas and inspiration, is adequate recognition. At the legal level, it's possible to set any ratio of the authorship rights with national bodies such as PRS or SACEM without fanfare. Arguably, the most powerful assertion of a collaborative effort is in publicity materials, but for a composer and performer to be credited as co-authors or co-composers is, regrettably, still something of a radical move in classical music. In my experience, pursuing this requires a united front and constant vigilance, because so many classical music organisations aren't yet used to the co-authorship model. It still surprises me that, when our creative juices have flowed so well in the act of making, they all too often desert us when faced with difficult conversations or intransigent marketing departments. Don't we owe it to our future selves to teach the industry how to serve its artists? We are still so attached to vertical structures in classical music. Outmoded hierarchies abound in authorship, in billings, in fees, in dressing room size, in governmental rescue packages. As Hélène Cixous wrote in her Call to Arms, The Laugh of the Medusa, back in 1976, "The future must no longer be determined by the past. I do not deny that the effects of the past are still with us, but I refuse to strengthen them by repeating them, to confer upon them an irremovability the equivalent of destiny, to confuse the biological and the cultural. Anticipation is imperative." Habits to break, habits to build. Habit is a foundation of any practice. It is by embedding habits that we establish a technique. It is by embodying habits that I prepare material for performance. I have habits in the way that I practice, in the way that I plan my working time, in the way that I think about the voice, or classical music, or performance, or art. Any two collaborators are unlikely to share the same habits, and so it is that, through a close working partnership, fresh air can be blasted into their respective practices. Anthropologist Eduardo Korn, who interrogates our understanding of semiosis and selves to propose an anthropology beyond the human, encapsulates this connection between habit and agency when he writes that being alive, being in the flow of life, involves aligning ourselves with an ever-increasing array of emerging habits, the lively flourishing of that semiotic dynamic whose source and outcome is what I call self, is also a product of disruption and shock. Within this disruption or shock, we may well find that a habitual something is absent, but absence means space, and space means room for change. Giorgio Agamben explains the creative importance of absence in terms of the Aristotelian concept of non-exercise, or not doing. He writes, "The one who possesses, or has the habit of, a potential can both put it into action and not put it into action. Aristotle's brilliant, even if apparently obvious, thesis is that potential is essentially defined by the possibility of its non-exercise." The word absence all too often has negative connotations, but here it is offered as a creative tool, which may help us as individual and collaborative selves seeking agency. Eduardo Korn expands our definition of selves by exploring human interactions with non-human living beings. Selves, he writes, are the products of a specific relational dynamic that involves absence, future, and growth, as well as the ability for confusion, and this emerges with, and is unique to, living thoughts. We humans believe ourselves to be selves, but in Korn's view, we are not the only ones. Does this confound the possibilities of collaboration? As the product of a specific relational dynamic, might a shared collaborative practice be considered a self in its own right? If so, it's worth paying attention to the habits we build into our collaborative practices. For example, how is labour shared? How are working sessions documented? Who controls the public dissemination of material? How do we deal with confusion? Because the answers will shape this self, for good or for bad. Stories as bridges. A lot has been said or written about the importance of dialogue between collaborating human selves, but what about stories? Every time we say, What if we ... We are starting to tell a new story, which is, as psychoanalyst Clarissa Pinkola Estes affirms, a time-honoured and instinctual technique to overcome obstacles. She writes, "Story greases the hoists and pulleys. It causes adrenaline to surge, shows us the way out, down or up, and, for our trouble, cuts us fine, wide doors in previously blank walls." The transformative power of a story is now being recognised in many disciplines as we acknowledge that we are not really objective and that we struggle to rationalise our way to new behaviour. George Monbiot asserts that we are creatures of narrative. Kate Raworth's model of donut economics employs storytelling to effect a paradigm shift. New stories emerge from fatigue and frustration, be it within our artistic practices or at societal systems, when we seek a way to bridge the gap between the present and the hoped-for future. Bruno Latour sees stories as harbingers of a new reality. As for the loops that are beginning to be added to our existence, one after another, making us more aware every day of the reciprocal feedback among agents of the terrestrial world, we need to make models of them, fictions, long before they can be verified in reality. Fiction anticipates what we hope to observe soon. The stories that we tell matter so much. There is much important work to do replacing the problematic legacy of tidy, hierarchical, vertical stories, such as the canon, in classical music, with the potential legacy of entangled, multifarious, horizontal stories. This isn't something new. I'm sure we've been trying to dismantle the inequalities in classical music for at least 100 years, but hopefully it feels more urgent because of related societal shifts. The story concerning female composers, for example, has changed because we made the effort to reimagine it. If we accept the potency of a story, we must also accept the potency of words. Words reveal so much, which is why I believe it matters to distinguish co-creation from commissioning, and why talking and writing are often given so much space in so many collaborative partnerships. If we're going to change the world with the collaborative work that we do, or better still, build new worlds, we must be precise and yet imaginative in the way we articulate our visions. Hot compost piles. Anna Lovenhaupt-Singh's book, The Mushroom at the End of the World, has found widespread appeal, with many of us enjoying the poetry and possibility of the image of a mycorrhiza, the mutual symbiotic association between a fungus and a plant. I'm drawn to the earthiness, the mess, and to the mystery of the mycelium. What pops up and where is always a surprise, just like so many of the fruits of our creative endeavours. All too often, we tidy up before we've even started. Ever had an idea killed by the process of writing a funding application? Or we can't make the time to sit in the squalor and actually digest the mayhem. The natural world has forever been an inspiration to artists. But I'm not here to talk about gazing at clouds or valleys. What excites me is the potential for the huge wealth of new ideas in other fields, many prompted by the environmental crisis, to help us further our thinking and our making as musicians. It all connects. We are bodies in this time and place. We interact with other bodies, beings and matter. Yet a musician's training is so narrow. Unlike those in the visual arts, we are not taught to engage with other disciplines or to integrate other areas of interest into our own practices. I worry that this isolation stultifies our capacity for transformation, which is precisely why our creative ecologies need messy, wild, tangential collaboration. If embarking upon collaboration, what can we, as musicians, learn from mycorrhizal symbiosis? If celebrating difference and diversity, what can we draw from an anthropology beyond the human? It all connects, but it would be a mistake to think that we, whether musicians, artists, women or living beings, are all the same. As Latour says, If we want to have a political ecology, we have to begin by acknowledging the division of a human species that has been prematurely unified. We have to make room for collectives in conflict with one another. We should not conform. We must stop tidying and unifying. Messy times are upon us, and we would do well to habituate ourselves to getting our hands dirty. It's not only in response to the crisis of the Anthropocene that we are tempted either to retort that technology will fix it, or concede that we're doomed anyway. It's sound advice that staying with the trouble is both more serious and more lively as a response to most challenges. To continue with Haraway's words, staying with the trouble requires making oddkin. That is, we require each other in unexpected collaborations and combinations, in hot compost piles. We become with each other, or not at all. That kind of material semiotics is always situated, someplace, and not no place, entangled and worldly. Alone, in our own separate kinds of expertise and experience, we know both too much and too little, and so we succumb to despair or to hope, and neither is a sensible attitude. Women's work. I now call myself a feminist. I was late to this party, but I've joined the fight for equality. Whilst I still haven't read much literature about feminism, I have for a few years been steeping myself in feminist literature, and the more I've listened to the voices of women such as Virginia Woolf, Deborah Levy, and Audre Lorde, the more I have questioned the purpose of my music making. It was not by conscious design that all my collaborative projects so far have been with other women. I think it just happened that I started working towards gender parity in my commissioning at about the same time that I began craving a more meaningful experience when working with composers. I had grown tired of feeling like a vessel for other people's creative visions. I had grown especially tired of contorting my sound, my body, to match other people's expectations. As soprano Bethany Beardsley has said, "That's the one thing that's so wonderful about the human voice. You have your own timbre, and it's uniquely yours. So why eliminate the most distinctive thing I can offer?" I realised that I wanted the process of developing and then performing a new work to be more personally embodied, so I set about making space for a different sort of performer-composer encounter. Sisu throws down the gauntlet of an embodied revolution. Though she is describing the solitary act of women's writing or écriture féminine, I have found these words to resonate through my collaborative work. Women must write through their bodies. They must invent the impregnable language that will wreck partitions, classes and rhetorics, regulations and codes. How to motivate the women of my generation to wreck and to write. How to learn from the long history of unhealthy collaboration, particularly between male composers and female performers, in which the woman's creativity was appropriated and or controlled by the man. How to move beyond gender in a wise way and harness the transformative potential of collaboration so that we can all flourish at no one's expense. As a woman, I continue to struggle to chart a wholesome route through the regular tiny instances of outright sexism or lazy gendered assumptions in my profession. As a new music soprano, I have had to grapple with the legacies of the amazing women who have blazed the trail before me. Kathy Barbarian, Bethany Beardsley, Joan LaBarbera, Dawn Upshaw, Barbara Hannigan even. Surely all have their stories of stolen agency or overlooked contributions, and must have battled with the problematic roles of diva or muse to, in nearly all cases, male composers. But they do not represent one kind of woman, and I am not them. To quote Sisu again, "Beware, my friend, of the signifier that would take you back to the authority of a signified. Beware of diagnoses that would reduce your generative powers." This is one reason why I have invested so much in building my own repertoire, to avoid the trap of aping someone else. It's also a strong motivator behind my work with eavesdropping, as I strive to provide a platform for other women to test their own risky endeavours and increase their sense of agency. Entangled selves. Contaminated entanglements describe not only the way I view my collaborative partnerships and practices, but also the way I would like my practice as a whole to connect to the rest of my life. I am a musician. I am an environmentalist. I am a woman. I am these things and more, alone and alongside others. Integrating and recalibrating my sense of selves is a work in progress, albeit foregrounded under current conditions, and perhaps this is why collaboration is meaningful, because the mess is the upheaval of the personal bleeding into the professional, the old me giving way to the new. What I hope we can take from this is some encouragement to think outside the box when it comes to composer-performer collaboration in particular, and collaboration in general. The imagery of stories, matsutake mushrooms, or compost heaps should inspire us to risk more, but with our eyes open. Collaboration can be magical. It's just very important to acknowledge that you're likely to get bloodied and dirty along the way. Part 2. In the thick of it. In this part, I turn from theory to practice and present 3 case studies. Again, this part can be read as a follow-up to the equivalent section in my earlier paper, as I document my ongoing collaborative work with composers Rebecca Saunders and Cassandra Miller, and reflect on a recent collaboration with composer Pia Palmer and choreographer Paola Bianchi. While my perspective forms the basis of the case studies, this time I invited my collaborators to contribute. A lot is left unsaid. The perspectives are also not equivalent. Where I focus on the project, I encourage my collaborators to share their more general thoughts on collaboration. Due to time constraints for this presentation, I've omitted their responses here, but the full version of this essay, including their words, can be found on my website. Working with Rebecca Saunders. I've been working with Rebecca since 2015. She has written 2 pieces for me, Skin, for soprano and 13 instruments in 2016, and The Mouth, for soprano and tape in 2020, and I have performed or premiered many other recent works. Rebecca's scores are always extremely precise. What's immediately obvious and rare is that she has really heard every sound that she has chosen, and that, as a result, her relationship with notation is very exacting. It truly is the medium through which her inner ear can speak to each performer. What I particularly appreciate about her vocal writing is that she is always embracing, emphasizing even, the fact that the voice is embodied. She welcomes the grain of the instrument and the expressivity of a face at work to produce her desired sounds. The voice, in her hands, is honest and imperfect, always seeking first and foremost to communicate rather than to beguile. As I've acknowledged before, our projects may not strictly be defined as collaborations, since we do adhere to the traditional composer-performer roles and we haven't built a shared process, but I would argue that our work together has collaborative elements and is often transformative. Rebecca always works very closely with her performers when preparing to write a new piece, searching particularly for unstable sounds and idiosyncratic techniques which contribute to the drama and viscerality that are characteristic of her music. What she describes as exploratory sessions are a whirlwind of experimentation, free-flowing ideas, risk-taking, and laughter. I perceive these sessions as the collaborative heart of the process, since they form the intimate creative space from which a bespoke and transformative body of work can emerge. We began work on The Mouth in 2019, joined by sound engineer Alexi Baskind. This time, the exploratory sessions served two purposes. Firstly, to explore sounds, starting with some of the motifs from earlier pieces, but roving far beyond that to test some more extreme possibilities. Secondly, to record all these experiments, assembling a bank of sounds that could eventually be used in the tape part. If I compare my memories of the sessions we had back in 2015 for skin with the ones we had ahead of the mouth, it's clear that I had grown considerably in confidence between the two. This time I felt able to contribute more. My knowledge of my own voice and my command over it has increased, as has my willingness to linger at the borders of what seems possible and to push past my own habits. We both acknowledge how lucky we were to find such a skilled and good-humoured colleague in Alexei. Introducing a new collaborator to an established partnership can rock the boat, but partly because Rebecca is always firmly at the creative helm, in this instance we found only benefits. The Mouth was premiered at IRCAM's rescheduled Manifest Festival in Paris in September 2020. This project took us all into new territory. I know that the compositional process was new for Rebecca because of having a tape part. It's clear, too, that she has summoned a sound world in this piece that is strikingly different from preceding vocal works. The creative process emboldened me in many ways, and I feel a strong sense of ownership over the piece. It feels made to measure, but with enough elastane that I can stretch to meet the extreme technical challenges, and is therefore thrilling to perform. The Tracery Project with Cassandra Miller. Stunned by the first performance of her duet for cello and orchestra, I approached Cassandra about writing a piece for me in 2015, and we started work in October 2016. The result is Tracery, a modular work for meditating singer and tape. Our process involves much sharing, as friends and as artists. We'd always begin with an update on our personal lives and on our current creative desires and frustrations. We'd also share ideas for possible source materials. Once we were working with material, my main task was to get into the meditative zone, feeding back to Cassandra the sensations or emotions that surfaced. Hers was to record each pass, to compose each subsequent headphone track, and to hold me, I suppose, in my unguarded and open state. It's worth restating here that intimacy and vulnerability were at the heart of what we were trying to create together. We wanted something truly collaborative, and a lot of risk comes with that. To date, we have made 5 modules. We were halfway through making an hour-long installation for the Aldborough Festival when lockdown descended in March 2020. In retrospect, this commission marked a new chapter for the project. Until this point, our collaborative process had been marked by an unhurriedness. Though there were deadlines to meet, somehow we always felt we had time to experiment, to discard at least as many ideas as we might test. Right from the outset, there was also a very lovely enmeshing of the personal and the professional in the way that Cassandra and I worked together. With the great gift of the installation commission came a particular set of conditions and a significant change in pressure. The process that had evolved so spontaneously faltered under these new conditions, and, to our terror, the magic evaporated. During a week-long residency in March 2020, it became clear that unhurriedness was off the table, and roles would have to be formalised. This eroded some of the space that we were used to giving over to the personal, and introduced an imbalance into the time and creative energy we were each contributing, and thus our sense of agency and authorship. This was a stark reminder to me that the central ingredients of collaboration, good communication, intimacy, and equality, demand time at every step along the way and cannot be taken for granted. Yes, it's laborious. In fact, our process did prove resilient enough to generate some usable material. We made the T-Rex module during that residency, and there are a couple more contenders filed away. The future of this project is, like everything at the moment, uncertain, but I can say that the tracery journey has been beautiful and surprising and truly transformative. Wechselwirkung, a collaborative project with Pia Palmer and Paola Bianchi. Early in 2018, I received an email from composer Pia Palmer inviting me to join a multi-stranded research project. In it, Pia set out her intention to explore the contemporary terrains of composition and music theatre as they are interwoven with feminist practice, theory, and aesthetics, and she stated that exchange with performers and colleagues is vital for the process and will be cultivated throughout the project. Bold claims, I thought. I've heard it all before, I thought, but I clambered aboard. Looking back at that email, what's striking is that, despite the references to listening, cooperation, and exchange, Pia never uses the word collaboration. Maybe she, like me, felt that it was often overused and therefore empty. This was, essentially, a research project that would have as one of its outputs a new piece of music theatre for singer, choreographer-dancer Paola Bianchi and ensemble Face. In February 2020, I joined Pia and Paola, along with musicologist and research assistant Christina Lesiak, in Vienna for the first of 2 development periods. At this point, Pia had sketches of music for me to read, and Paola had a choreographic schema to share. The plan was to discover to what extent I could combine them. It's important to say that I have no movement or dance training. Pia's sketches contained both extremely detailed, complex, notated material and much looser, gestural motifs designed to stimulate improvised material. Paola was using a choreographic system that she had developed, thankfully for non-dancers. A series of recorded audio instructions described a pose that, through repeated listening, could be learned, embodied, and then strung together to form a sort of free sequence. These 3 days were exhausting. Learning the choreography demanded intense concentration and a lot of courage. I was frustrated that I hadn't had time to memorize the music and so couldn't really combine the singing and the movement. The whole experience was so far outside my comfort zone, and it was exhilarating. But it could have been a nightmare. What made this a positive experience was the atmosphere in the room. From the beginning, there was a sense of spaciousness to the creative environment, and there was careful, respectful dialogue. It helped that Pia and Paola already had a history of working together, so there was a confident bond at the heart of the project. It was also a strength, I think, that we were 4 in the creative space, and that no 2 roles were alike. Progress was limited during the second development period, in September 2020. I had hurt my back, Paola had burnt her arm, everyone was anxious about the pandemic. We concluded with a clear vision of the piece, but a daunting amount of work still to do. For me, the biggest question still remained: could I memorize such a complex score? Could I perform the movements in a convincing way? Could I combine the 2 with any confidence? Against all the odds, we gathered in Vienna in November 2020 and pulled the piece together, filming it for Wien Modern. Achieving this does feel like something of a miracle, both at a personal level and against the broader backdrop of a cultural sector in paralysis, and stands as testimony to the trust that Pia places in her collaborative partners. The resulting piece, Wechselwirkung, is one of the most challenging works I have performed, and probably the most collaborative. I gave myself one rule during this project: don't think about whether it works. That, I decided, was someone else's job. I was in terrain that was far beyond my expertise, and I was far too inside the task to attempt to assess it from the outside. I had to take a risk with what I was offering, and I had to trust my collaborators. 3 threads woven through a year. These 3 very different projects all culminated in 2020. They represent some of the major milestones in that year, proud as I am of the final works and of having survived the challenges, some pandemic-related, some not, that they posed. Yes, all 3 happen to have been with or between women. Beyond that, though, I think there are very few similarities between the projects in terms of process or outcome. Their musical concerns and styles certainly vary hugely. And anyway, I fiercely resist the notion of feminine or female music. Each has had a significant impact on my work and on the way I think about my work. Working with Rebecca on The Mouth reminded me that a partnership doesn't need to be enmeshed at every stage to cultivate ownership and agency. This most recent period working on Tracery taught me that a shift in conditions can severely test a collaborative process. The project with Pia and Paola showed me that remarkable trust and respect between partners can hold a whole lot of mess. Part 3. Staying with the trouble. To be honest, there have been times in the past few years when I have despaired, when I have seriously considered having a t-shirt made with "fuck collaboration" across its front. I have been frustrated by the work. I have been hurt by my colleagues. I've been bored by the whole topic. I am wiser, though. I think I see collaboration for what it is now, which is a pretty irresponsible chemical experiment. As for the outcome, all bets are off. I would now define collaboration as the process of developing a shared and transformative practice that intentionally cultivates an intimate creative space and produces a distinctive body of work. The purpose of collaboration is to explore a new process of making, and the hope is that the results somehow make a new proposition. And we do need propositions. In the words of Latour, if, as the old maxim maintains, politics is the art of the possible, there still need to be arts to multiply the possibles. In terms of the purpose of collaborative work within my broader practice, it occurs to me that to judge individual pieces or projects is to miss the point. Each commission, each new idea is both a response to what has come before, sometimes a reaction against, and a bid for something new. My repertoire as a whole is a sequence of constantly reorienting links, a fungal network, a quest for the holy grail of fulfillment. The common thread through them all is a narcissistic obsession with growth. Shoshana Rosenberg and Hannah Reardon Smith capture this well in their toolkit for transformative sound use. In all my music making, I want to be engaging with sound use that stirs something within, something direct and determined to make itself known in the world. I think my fascination with collaboration endures because I recognise that it is a rare thing. I've realised that I don't need it necessarily, also that it only makes sense with particular people and under particular conditions. As I hope is clear by now, I do not fetishise collaboration as the only means by which to create meaningful work, but it is one tool for change. I am weary of the old propositions in classical music that reinforce the hierarchies and the fixed roles, and ghettoise us, or encourage us to ghettoise ourselves. Some of us, at least, need to stay with the trouble. Habits form attitudes. Absence creates opportunity. New stories dismantle old myths. This is why I am stimulated by the poetic imagery of cosmic connection that I find in other fields. I need to keep my horizons wide, and I need new stories to tell other stories with.